One of the most fascinating things to me about the American Civil War is the regiments and the identities they took on, specifically early on in the war. In the months leading up to the American Civil War, there was this rush of patriotism and fear of missing out on this conflict. When regiments were raised at the beginning of the war, they were able to choose their own officers, they brought their own weapons, they chose their own uniforms, and because of that, these units kind of formed their own identities from their communities and states in which they were from. Now, of all these regiments, my favorite is the 11th New York Volunteer Infantry. The 11th New York was an infantry regiment of the Union Army in the early years of the American Civil War. The regiment was organized in New York City in May of 1861 as a Zouave regiment. Their commander was Colonel Elmer E. Ellsworth, a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln. One of the most unique things about this unit is it was drawn from the ranks of the city's many volunteer fire companies. This unit was alternately known as the Ellsworth Zouaves, 1st Fire Zouaves, 1st Regiment of New York Zouaves, and the U.S. National Guards. Like many Zouave regiments, the men of the 11th New York were fashioned in uniforms not typical of your standard Union infantry soldier. One of my favorite things about this unit is many of them went off to war wearing their individual fire badge of their respective fire companies. After arriving in D.C. on May 2nd, a fire broke out on May 9th at the Willard Hotel in downtown D.C. The men of the 11th New York were able to showcase their firefighting abilities and help extinguish the blaze. On May 24th, 1861, less than 24 hours after the Commonwealth of Virginia seceded from the Union, the 11th New York was tasked with securing a telegraph office in Alexandria, Virginia. This action meant this unit was among the first to occupy territory in the newly formed Confederate States. After the telegraph office was secured, Colonel Ellsworth assembled a group of men to cut down a nearby Confederate flag atop the Marshall House Inn. Ellsworth's group entered the inn and quickly cut down the flag, but they were encountered by the proprietor James Jackson. Jackson would fire his shotgun point blank into Colonel Ellsworth's chest, killing him instantly. A man by the name of Corporal Francis Burnell responded in kind by fatally shooting the innkeeper. He would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions 12 years later in 1877. Because of this, his actions were the earliest in the war that resulted in the receipt of the award. The Fire Zouaves' first major combat experience occurred during the First Battle of Bull Run. The 11th New York would arrive as the fight moved from Matthews Hill to Henry House Hill. On the initial confrontation with the 33rd Virginia Infantry on the Confederate left, both Union and Confederate forces were initially confused by the uniforms worn by the 11th New York. The 11th New York would encounter Confederate Colonel Jeb Stuart and his 150 cavalrymen. The 11th's volleys quickly killed 8 of the riders and wounded 9, with the rest escaping back into the woods. Jeb Stuart's charge had little effect on the organization of the Fire Zouaves. The 11th would later be joined by the 1st Minnesota and the 14th Brooklyn, and they would make 4 charges up Henry Hill, each of those attempts failing. In the wild melee, the 69th color bearer was killed and its colors were lost, but an officer from the 11th, Captain John Wadley, was able to recapture the Irish colors and return it to the fighting 69th. When General McDowell gave the order to retreat, the 11th New York acted as the rear guard. It was during this retreat that the regiment saw its heaviest casualties. In all, the 11th would lose a total of 177 men at Bull Run, 35 being killed, 74 wounded, and another 68 missing and presumed captured. The regiment would later be stationed near Hampton Roads, Virginia during the Peninsula Campaign, but experienced little fighting. The regiment was mustered out of service on June 2nd of 1862. The remaining members of the 11th New York would either join the 17th or the 44th New York Volunteer Infantry Regiments. Now, although this unit's history is brief, I can't help but be attached to them because of my connections to the American Fire Service. I think their story is pretty unique, and I hope you learned a thing or two. So with that being said, we'll catch you on the next one.